Hi friends, happy Tuesday. Today for National Week of the Young Child is Tasty Tuesday, which means we're talking about cooking and food, which might seem weird that it's also hat day for us for dressing up, but a lot of times people who work with food have to wear hats or things on their heads in order to keep the food safe and healthy. So that's why we're doing hat day today. But I'm reading a story called Stone Soup. This is a very old book. Long, long ago, in a faraway land, some soldiers were marching home from war. They were very tired, for they had traveled a great distance. They were also very hungry. The soldiers would have welcomed even a small bowl of soup. But how could they make soup? They had nothing to put into a pot except the stones they found in the road. And who ever heard of stone soup? In the distance, the soldiers saw a small village. They thought about the comfortable beds and the delicious foods they might find there, and they walked a little faster. "I would be happy to get a loaf of warm bread and a nice bed to sleep in," said one soldier. "I would be glad to get even one slice of bread and a warm barn to sleep in," said another. "We will be lucky to find a few stale crusts before we are chased from the village," said the third. He knew that the townspeople would not want to share what they had with strangers. "Still, we can ask," said the first soldier. "Yes," agreed the second. "If we do not ask, we will never know." "All right," said the third. "You will ask. Then you will know." The townspeople had seen the soldiers coming, and now they were busy hiding their food. They hid their potatoes down in their cellars. They tucked their vegetables under their beds. They stuffed their barley into their pillowcases. They hung their meat inside their closets, and they lowered pails of milk down into the wells. At last, all the food in the entire village was hidden. The villagers went inside their house and waited. When the soldiers arrived, they knocked on the first door they saw. "Could you spare some food and a place to sleep?" they asked. But the villagers said they had no extra beds and too little food for themselves. So the soldiers went to the next house, and the next, and the next. The answer was always the same. There was no food, there was no place to sleep. Then one of the soldiers had an idea. "Good villagers," he called, "since you have no food, perhaps you will let us borrow a large cooking pot. Then we can make a pot of stone soup." "Stone soup," whispered the villagers. "Who ever heard of stone soup?" "This is something we must find out about," whispered the mayor. "Someone bring a pot, quickly." When the pot had been brought to the village square, the soldiers filled it with water and built a fire beneath it. "Finding good soup stones is the most important part," they said. Then they looked and they looked, and finally each soldier found some nice smooth stones. They put the stones into the pot and brought the water to a boil. Then they sniffed. "Something is missing," said the first soldier. "Yes," agreed the second, "but what?" "Salt and pepper," said the third, sniffing the soup. Then he turned to the villagers and said, "We know you have no food, but maybe you could find a bit of pepper and some salt? Pepper and salt will bring out the flavor of the soup stones." At once, the mayor's wife disappeared and came back with some salt and pepper. "Thank you," said the soldiers as they shook the salt and pepper into the pot. "It smells better already." They all sniffed the soup. Then one of the soldiers said, "A good stone soup should have some onions, but since there are none, we will simply do without them." A peasant woman heard the soldier and said, "I may have an onion or two," and she hurried home. Soon she returned with half a dozen peeled onions, which she dropped into the soup. "This will be a good stone soup," said the soldiers. "It's a pity we don't have any celery, but that would be hoping for too much. After all, we were lucky to find such good soup stones in the first place." A farmer's wife heard this and ran home. In a few minutes she returned with several stalks of celery. which she cut into small pieces and tossed into the soup. After a while, the first soldier said, "Something is lacking." "There are no carrots," agreed the second. "But there is no sense in asking for something that no one has," added the third. Then a peasant said, "Carrots? I might just have 1 or 2 carrots at home." And he ran off to get them. He returned with several crisp orange carrots, which he sliced into the soup. "The stones are cooking nicely," remarked the soldiers. "Just smell the soup. Too bad we don't have a few potatoes. But why wish for something you can't get?" A farmer overheard this and hurried away. Soon he was back with an armful of potatoes. The soldiers peeled them and tossed them into the soup. Then the first soldier stirred the soup, saying, "It is a bit too thin, but since there is no barley to thicken it, we will have to be satisfied." The town miller heard this and ran to his mill. Soon he returned with some barley, which he stirred into the soup. "A perfect stone soup," said the first soldier. "If only it were a bit richer," suggested the second soldier. "Too bad we have no milk to stir in." And before long, someone had brought him a bucket of milk for the soup. The third soldier said, "With a bit of meat, it would be just like the soup we made for the king last month. But since there is no meat, we must be content with what we have." The villagers buzzed with excitement. The soldiers had dined with the king. The townspeople ran to their houses and came back with big chunks of meat, which they put into the soup. When at last the stone soup was ready, the soldiers tasted it. "It is thick," said the first. "It is rich," said the second. "It is fit for a king," said the third. Now the villagers decided that if the soup were really fit for a king, then it could not be served alone, so they brought out loaves of bread and roasts and barrels of cider. Long tables were set in the village square, and everyone sat down to eat. And all of the villagers agreed that the soup was thick, rich, and fit for a king. They could hardly believe it had been made from stones. They ate and drank and danced well into the night. Then they took the soldiers into their homes and let them sleep in the most comfortable beds. In the morning, everyone gathered again in the village square. "Thank you for everything," said the soldiers. We want to thank you," said the mayor. "You have taught us something important." "Goodbye," called the soldiers as they headed down the road. "Goodbye," called the mayor. "Imagine," whispered the townspeople, "thick, rich soup made from stones. No one will ever believe it. After all, who ever heard of stone soup?" And that is the end. I do have a couple questions for you to talk about with your families. That's such a great story. That's a story that's been told for many, 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 many years because we learn so much about helping each other out and what we can do when we all work together. Have you ever made soup at your house? Do you like to help with the cooking? What kinds of things did you put in the soup that you've made? If you could make any kind of food today, what would you cook? And in the end of that story, they had all the people of the town come and sit at a big table. Have you ever had a lot of people over for dinner? What was that like? I would love to see pictures of anything that you might be cooking this week or recipes that you're helping with. Cooking is a great way to learn about math and science and measuring. So I hope you're having a great Tasty Tuesday, and I'll see you tomorrow. Remember that Jesus loves you all the time, no matter what. Bye.